Thanks. Okay, one time.
We'll get up for questions.
All right.
Thanks, Yahya. We'll hold the questions to the end. Next speaker I'd like to call up is Martin Kneebone, the Director of Fresh Logic. Martin has a detailed understanding of the Australian food market and supply systems as a result of working on both sides of the Tasman over the last 25 years. He's operated in both the retail and supply sectors, including 10 years in corporate retail of food. His company, Fresh Logic, is based in Melbourne and provides market intelligence and consulting services to those operating in the fresh produce supply chain. Fresh Logic owns and operates the Meal Pulse Food Consumer Panel. Martin brings a deep working knowledge of the sharp end of the supply chain and has developed a reputation for his ability to draw out useful and workable commercial applications from his reviews and analysis. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you, Robert, for those kind words, and thanks to the PMA team for giving me the opportunity to talk to the group. I'm going to... Oops, that's good. I'm going to cover these three topics today. Market settings. I think it's important we understand how it all works, because there's some things in the way this fruit and vegetable market works in Australia and New Zealand that's bigger than us. And when we're trying to add value, particularly when we're trying to use information, it's good to understand that. I'm going to give you our thoughts on how to use information, because I think we're encouragingly getting to the point of seeing the value in it, but where we may stumble a little is how do I apply this in my business? And we'll look at some key issues that are happening and provide insights we think come out of the use of information on that, and leave you perhaps with some thoughts as to how that you might be able to apply it. That's us. We work up and down the supply chain. I'd like to think we lead with a through chain view. We understand what's produced, and we've got a pretty good handle on what's happening in the household. And really it's about flowing that through, understanding that, seeing which channels it goes through, and understanding what drives that. That's what we've concentrated on, and I think that given the dynamics of that market, that's a healthy recipe to put around how you source information. So first up, let's have a look at this market. Fruit and vegetables in Australia, we'll profile here. No apologies to the Kiwis, but we'll use that as the example. We have a retail market of about 11.9 billion. We have households that are spending on average late 20s, $28, $29 a week, and around about 7.5 kilos. That's what they're buying. Around about a low 20% of the volume that we produce goes through food service, and that's a difficult area to map. We're only ever going to get that in wholesale. Now, in most markets, they're the profiles that you'd get, and they're the profiles that you'd use, but you need to look further when you're looking at fruit and veg. You need to consider the supply dynamics, because in this market, supply is almost as important as the demand dynamics in influencing the value that you can achieve for things. Particularly in Australia, where we distribute basically most of what we produce. I think 90% of what we produce gets distributed in this local market, and that sets things up. We know we have increasing imports. So if we looked at that as the way the supply chain is structured, where's the pressure? And there's 3 or 4 points where that pressure is. More inputs are coming, quite clearly. And I won't ask for a vote on kiwi apples. We'll probably end up with going with a majority of residents winning that one at the moment. But we've got pressure on supply bases locally because we are not necessarily expanding exports. The Australian dollar's not helping us on exports. The yield out of production is not as good as what it could be because we're leaving too much in the field. Going down the chain, food service is losing share of stomach to retail. It has been for the last 18 months, 2 years, and that's tight. Within retail, we've got pressure on the fruiterers. Greengrocers, as the supermarkets have wound up, become more aggressive and have taken some share. We've seen this in the early 90s. We've seen the fruiterers consolidate substantially. I think there is a level of consolidation going on now, but they won't go away. They'll be there. They'll be there as long as this marketplace really looks to sell most of what it produces in this local market, because that gives them a shoulder of supply. Now, if you understand the market at this level, thinking again about the information use, you're then able to bore down, and you can take it in at a category level. And that's the way that apples work. a $750 million category. And when you are able to reconcile it all the way through, you can then go to your supply chain partners with plans built on these sorts of things, and you can agree on the value of what you might add, and you get different traction. And that's a big thing in using information. Carrots, another profile, similar sort of thing. Surprisingly, we've got 285,000 tonnes of apples, 234,000 tonnes of carrots, but we only have a retail value of 215 million. And I'll show you something later in the presentation about how we have profiled the range between here and the US and the UK, and it might give us some suggestions as to how there are opportunities to use that information. But that, we're saying that, think of that as a good template to understand how it all works. You look at what you're doing, and then you can add value and talk to your supply chain partners about on those terms. This is what households do in terms of share of food. Excuse me. And when I say share of food, it's important to consider that there is food spent out of the home and in the home. Very important, because in the last 18 months, 2 years, that share of stomach has moved probably between 1 and 2% towards retail. So whilst retail may be going through some challenges with deflation, they've actually picked up share of stomach. And what is a fairly frugal consumer, they're buying value quite hard, but on the food market for households, which when you strip out all the cleaning goods and groceries, about 100 billion, 1 or 2% of that has insulated the pressure on the retail sector. I think that, I don't think there'll be a lot more. I think that the spend on those breakfast, lunch, dinner occasions out of home now is about 25%. In the late 2008, it was 28.5%. So that's, I suppose, a direct reflection of how tight the food service sector is. But when you're thinking about food, you need to think about everywhere they spend it. Because if you can find those people that are spending less out of home, you've also found the people that need to buy more through retail. The two link very clearly. In fruit and veg, who spends what? Well, you've only got to look at that chart to say that we've got a huge concentration of big spenders. We have 16% of the households spending greater than $50, representing 35% of the market in Australia. That's a very, very strong bias towards the top end. And yet down the other end, we've got nearly 14%, nearly 40% only spending 14. So clearly there are opportunities, maybe some challenges. Enjoying the patronage of those higher spenders is huge because of the relativities and all that. And maybe that underlies some of the opportunity. I've been fortunate enough to work as part of the consumption task force group, and these are some of the settings that we've used in trying to define how we target what we're doing and how we may be able to grow things. But there's a big lump there that aren't playing as much as what we'd like them to. Households, quite different behaviours. You need to think about who's buying what. They have very, very different levels of spending out of home. The wealthier young singles will be spending 45% of their food expenditure out of home. The empty nesters, it might be 20%. So quite different behaviours, and they're looking for different products. The big takeout is that the families, as highlighted there, that's just under 50% of the retail market. There's no two ways about it that the indicators of spend on fruit and vegetables the biggest drivers of that clearly are the amount of people in the household and the discretionary dollars. They're very, very directly related to it. So how can we use information? How can we translate it through to strategy? Let me suggest there are 3 useful dimensions to break it out to. Find out how many households are buying the product. Now in this market, that's going to vary somewhere between 20 and 80%. You can find that. That's what you should be extracting out of your information use. Find out how many shopping trips they're undertaking. Now that's another dimension you should pull out of the information. Then find out what's the quantity they're purchasing on the shopping trip. If you've got those 3, you're going to add up to the volume of the market. And you know what's being supplied, and you work with your retail partners, you've pretty much framed up the first principles of which one you're going to work on. Is the answer to grow performance by getting more penetration? Is the excuse me, is the answer in more shopping trips, or is the answer in working on the quantity, perhaps by the range or the configuration of it? Most of it will come back to one of those three, and that's a really good set of first principles to I guess, challenge your use of information to produce. If you've got that, you're at base one, and useful, I think. So let's go on and look at some of these issues in an information use context, applying some of those things and just looking across them and saying, well, what can we take out of them and then commercialise? Again, the focus being what's the information that we can use. We look at ethical foods, the demand for convenience, home cooking, retail promotional activity, which has gone through some quite strong changes, again in this market, although similar in New Zealand, new channels and new media. So what's happening with ethical foods? Well, it's fair to say that there is a sea of alternatives. We have said to the consumer, we know you're more aware, and as a food industry, here is some of the ways that we want you to understand how to acknowledge this. Are they confused? You bet they're confused, because they're only reading headlines. Bear in mind, this is the consumer in today's media market. They're only picking the headlines out. So what headlines are they taking out? Pretty much three things. Buy local, which if I was with IGA, I'd be pretty happy with. Organic and free range. When you look at the alternatives underneath, that's a fairly distilled view they're taking out. Why have they done that? Because there's too much to comprehend in the rest of it, and as a food industry, we've confused them. And if you want to understand the relativities and premiums, free range is getting clearer, and you find a product like a chicken thigh fillet, which will sit on a self-serve retail shelf next to a conventional product, and it's getting around about 20%. So these benefits are welcomed, not necessarily fully understood. I feel quite nervous about some of the systems around them, but buying local is up. Buying local is hitting 3 or 4 spots with the consumer. And that, yes, I understand proximity, I like supporting my local community. These are the sort of considerations they've got. And are we seeing some of this in our industry? Yes, we are. I understand that out the back of Griffiths, which has always been an area that's been created from what it produces, there's a crop of free-range apples underway. It's free-range apples. Now, we ask ourselves, hang on, is that possible? Well, I'm not sure if it is. But let me tell you that if we flowed free-range apples through to the market, for a short time, we would get a premium, a very short time. We'd be found out. But that underlies how much confusion we've got around this thing. And from our point of view, when the awareness of these things is so high, it's in our interest to try and clarify that and make sure it's right. Demand for convenience, it continues. It's the major driver of taking product into different forms. And look at the value comparisons. Product in particularly smaller portion sizes in some areas has enjoyed substantial contributions to category growth, but in other areas not. And all you've really got to do is walk around a retail offer to say, look at that range there. They've got 15 or 20 products and they range from $2 to $15 per kilo. And over here, we haven't done it. So there are some quite strong opportunities. And when we look at where the world is, Fruit Logistica in February, clearly smaller portion sizes coming through everywhere. Why? Why smaller portion sizes? Well, we have more and more single-person households. We have shorter meal planning timeframes. More meals are planned from 4 and 5 o'clock on. People are more concerned about home waste than they have been for a long time, and they are prepared to trade off the quantity they buy and the price they pay for less waste, because they don't like that waste, because it hits a lot of environmental buttons as well. It's not a good feeling. So in many senses, we're seeing the portion size come down and be welcomed by consumers. Again, hitting 3 or 4 spots, not a broad understanding. All they're going to do is take the headlines out. But what we're trying to say here is, which bits are they responding to? Let's look at our carrot range in Australia next to the UK and the US range. So across the bottom there, we've got the product selling weight, and on the other axis, we've got the price per kilo. And in most instances, these things will follow that sort of line, where the smaller the pack size, the higher the price per kilo. In both of those markets, a far stronger range of carrots in smaller portion sizes. A lot of those are milled, but still sold as fresh chilled, but we don't have